Spoken. There we go. Usually a little more soft-spoken at work, but then occasionally when we're doing athletic events and things, people hear my parent voice or my coach voice. So I'm used to speaking to a large room. So today we're going to be walking through SharePoint Upgrade. We're going to walk through the classic case for how to do a database attach and then some of the special scenarios that you may encounter in your environment. But before we get started, I just want to introduce something here, just to set my qualifications appropriately. So you can determine if this is something that you want to stay for to hear from someone like me. Prior to my current role, and I work as CTO at Dell Software, I employed child labor in the pursuit of other Microsoft technologies beyond SharePoint. And if this will be happy.
I used to be a big believer in the Euler school. And like many of you, of course I use SQL. But now that's all changed. Microsoft Dynamics helps me empower an unbelievable and global workforce in ways I've never dreamed possible. I call you, I'm a big believer in Microsoft Dynamics. Microsoft Dynamics.
I love that she has no interest at all in anything but the bees.
Automate, streamline, financial, cups and relationship. And supply chain processes. Anyway, that can help you drive the business success.
Great. Yeah, that's from a couple years ago. So now you've seen my home. You've seen two of my children. My name is Chris McNulty. I joined Quest Software, now part of Dell, about 2 years ago. I've been working in the SharePoint space for over a dozen years at this point. I've installed SharePoint well over 1,000 times. I'm not going to walk through all the parts of my CV, but I do very much appreciate. I'm from Milton, Massachusetts, which is the first town south of Boston. I grew up in New York. I'm really here thanks to 3 sponsors. Obviously, Microsoft's support for our ability to come out and do something I'm passionate about, and that's speaking about SharePoint to audiences around the world is great. The second sponsors I always have to thank are my family, in particular my wife. This is not, for those of you unfamiliar with Massachusetts, this is not what it looks like in Massachusetts. This is my wife, Haley, who's holding down the fort while I'm down here. Nate and Rachel have gotten a little bigger since I made that video, and my oldest is going to be a sophomore at NYU this fall. But I live, as I mentioned, just south of Boston, and I grew up way out here in the East End of Long Island. The other sponsor I will mention incredibly quickly, because we're not going to talk about our products today, is for us Dell Software. Building on our heritage with Quest, we have a very broad portfolio. We focus on 3 things: how to manage and govern SharePoint, how to migrate into it, and how to add rapid customization to it. If you need any information about those products, please come to our booth to get more information. We are not going to be touching them at all in today's session. So that's one of the house rules that I always have. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to walk through 5 things. First, we're going to walk through the value of SharePoint 2013, just a quick introduction for the business case for putting it into your enterprise. How do we plan for the upgrade cycle? There's a lot of new things that have come in with SharePoint 2013, help you with planning and road mapping that. How do you prepare your source content, probably in SharePoint 2010, to be upgraded? We'll execute the classic database attach and the site collection upgrade, and finally walk through some special cases. If you have sophisticated use of content type hubs and managed metadata, I'll give you the roadmap for how we upgrade those, as well as talking about upgrading from older versions of SharePoint, 2007 and forward. Every time a group of 2 or more people gather for SharePoint these days, the word governance has to be used, and a presentation on SharePoint is no exception. Just a couple of house rules. We're not going to go through custom coding any of the things that went in here, and for the interest of time, I'm not walking through the installation roadmap or the creation of shared service applications. Obviously, will not touch my own products during today's session. There's a lot of material to cover. I will be sticking around at the end to answer questions. You can always get in touch with me also through Twitter, at cmcnulty2000. If you're on Twitter, if you follow me, a link to this deck, in addition to what's on the TechEd site, a link to this deck should have gone out just at the start of today's session. So always available to help you walk through this. So why SharePoint? Is anyone here not running SharePoint today? Okay, then you all come to the right place. How many of you would identify as IT pros? So I know who we've got here. Most of you? Okay, good. Developers? Okay, some. Business analysts, users, folks, or all of the above, none of the above? Great. That's the usual mix that we see with this. SharePoint 2013, in case you haven't seen it yet, remains at its core what it has been for the first 4 major releases as well. A web-based technology that allows us to centralize and collaborate on documents. Microsoft's made a lot of investments in 2013 to make it higher capacity, to improve document management, what you can do with the UI, and add personal storage with something called SkyDrive Pro. If you need more information, by the way, about SkyDrive Pro, I'm doing a session on SharePoint Social at 5 o'clock today down the hall. We'll compare and contrast SkyDrive and SkyDrive Pro as part of the social roadmap. If you're passionate about 2013 and you're looking to make the business case, just very quickly, the 3 things in it that I think make the most sense. First, social. Microsoft made heavy investments to improve the baseline social capabilities of SharePoint. We'll talk about that again later today, but that's one of the key things. You get it there, as Microsoft likes to say, for free. It is in the box, ready to roll, to accelerate the pace of collaboration with a roadmap for how we take that social collaboration to the cloud with Yammer. Second, search. Search in 2010 was pretty good. How many of you ran search in 2007 or older versions? Okay. I like to say that search in older versions was sort of a random document generator, right? You put a word in and you sort of see what comes up, and hopefully it's on the first page. There's no rhyme or reason to why things come together. If you went to my friend Barry's session yesterday on search, you probably have seen some of the enhancements there. Search in 2010 was relatively accurate. Search in 2013 improves on the past with the introduction of some of the fast bits. Graphical refiners, in-place previews, record counts. Search is another big thing to leverage in 2013. And finally, the apps model. Microsoft has moved to, in addition to the classic APIs, a cloud-based model where your apps can live somewhere else so that you can move seamlessly between on-premises and the cloud and consume things from an app store. We at Dell, we're participating in that app store. We've got a free app that's out there. This last one is something that's a work in progress, to be honest. It's a new API. It's going to take 12 to 24 months for the ecosystem and for professional developers to catch up to these APIs. But these are the 3 things in 2013 that you'll probably get the most value from. On to migrations. If you read TechNet, you will see references to the 2 techniques for upgrading: database attach and in-place upgrade. How many of you ever tried an in-place upgrade in prior versions? Anyone? Some. How many people were successful with an in-place upgrade? Yeah, it's not really the appropriate way to upgrade a multi-server, complex, customized environment. The idea of you put the image in the disk if you have one, click OK, hope it works. It seldom did. Microsoft has fixed in-place upgrade in 2013 by making it impossible to try one. The only way you're going to be able to upgrade using in-the-box techniques is with database attach. If you read TechNet, Microsoft will be very jargony and talk about V2V and B2B upgrades, version to version, build to build. What that all boils down to is saying that when we patch SharePoint, when we put out cumulative updates or service packs, that's a mini upgrade process, so-called build to build. All that they're saying with support for in-place farm upgrade for build to build means you don't have to build a new farm every time you patch your server, which is fantastic. But other than that, you're going to be doing database attach, and we'll walk through how to get ready for that. Before you even start, 3 things that you're going to have to take a look at: upgrading the base level of the operating system, potentially upgrading SQL, and getting your content together. Very quickly, this is what to expect for your environments. Windows Server 2008 R2 or better, SQL Server 2008 R2 or better, and the memory requirements as listed out here. Since we've been able to start talking about SharePoint 2013 publicly in the last year, I've heard from a lot of folks around the world who looked at these requirements and said, wow, Microsoft is really upping what they're looking for. And it's true. There are capabilities in 2013 with things like distributed cache and the way the search engine works and more workloads being put there that do make it somewhat hungrier. But the truth of the matter is these numbers are no different than what any of us have been saying for the last 3 years as recommended best practices. No one is going to tell you that you can't make SharePoint run in 8 gigs of RAM. All that this number here is trying to get to, 24 gigs of RAM, is saying if you were going to run SharePoint on one server with several hundred users and you want them all to have a good enterprise experience, give it a lot of memory. That's all we're trying to get to. So if you have hardware or virtual hardware that meets these requirements, great. If not, this is one thing you'll have to prepare. Second thing, SQL. SharePoint is usually only an N+1 upgrade. There's an upgrade path from 2010 to 2013, and it's much more complex for earlier versions. However, SQL servers can be upgraded in place relatively easily. If you have a larger, complex environment, there's more steps involved, obviously, where you may be looking at upgrading parts of a cluster or dealing with replication or mirroring. But this is the roadmap. To get to either of the 2 supported versions, SQL 2008 R2 or Denali, there is an upgrade path for you. So even if you were running SQL Server 2000, which isn't supported for 2010, by the way, you can go directly to 2008 R2. And these guys can all come right to SQL 2012. I would encourage you to try to go as far as you can and get to SQL 2012. One of the key investments that Microsoft made in SQL in advance of the release of SharePoint was the inclusion of some of the BI capabilities like Power View and SSRS alerting. They really enhanced the business intelligence stack in 2012, really with an eye to the understanding that those things are only principally consumed in SharePoint environments. So 2012 is probably the way to go, but 2008 R2, there's a ton that you can do there as well. The third thing to be aware of is bringing your content together. We see 5 classic cases for why people are bringing content together onto 2010. First reason, obviously, is people may need to fix a bad migration in the past. There was an aborted migration. Someone stood up a 2010 environment, but the content never all moved. Chance to fix it. Second and third case, either mergers and acquisitions or with aggregation. You may have lots of SharePoint out there in your environment. It's a fantastic thing. SharePoint can be stood up on a desktop sitting under someone's desk, and you can get a departmental solution running with SharePoint Foundation relatively easily. It's a free download. It's also the curse of any organizations that are trying to imply information governance. You have a chance, based on your timeline, to go find those pools of SharePoint, bring them together, and bring them together in a way that's going to match your moving forward architecture. I'll also talk about this at greater length in the social session. But 10 years ago, the way we built intranets, whether it was on SharePoint or not, was usually organized by geographies. Now we tend to break down a lot of those barriers, and the central organizing principle is usually projects or teams. So you have a chance to fix some of those information architecture things in advance as you bring the content together. And lastly, upgrade readiness. If you've got lots of things all over the place, you may have a legacy store like Documentum over there, some old file servers here, and so forth. Getting everything into 2010 in advance is usually the first staging step, so then you only have one move to make to bring things forward into 2013. So taking that content, how do we figure out what we're going to move? First, We need to figure out what content we have that we think is appropriate for SharePoint. Governance is essential. Understand the business mission of SharePoint in your organization. I've been speaking to a lot of customers this week. We all think we know what SharePoint does well, but they have very different roadmaps. Two people I talked to within the space of an hour. One was very focused on SharePoint as a collaboration engine, but does not have to be the book of record for final products. Other company wanted to do records management in SharePoint. It's the repository of record, but the way that stuff is being collaborated on, not really a mission there. So you have to figure out why you want to put something in SharePoint. Understand you may want to get rid of some duplicates. There are some files that SharePoint is not really good at. Things like large database files, uncompressed video, some financial planning applications that generate really large I/O-intensive matrices. Not everything fits in SharePoint. Most things do, but not everything. Figure out what you have, how much there is, and then you're going to keep iterating through that with your business sponsors until you know exactly what you need to move forward. In addition, in SharePoint 2007, when we were having these discussions, and maybe even with 2010, the conversation was usually focused on how do I get content into SharePoint. SharePoint is a much better application platform today than it was 6 years ago. It's much more likely that you have customization. Prior to joining Quest, I ran a consultancy in the Northeast for a number of years, and one of the big questions I would always ask, people would stop you quickly and say, I have a SharePoint upgrade. What's it going to look like? First questions are always about how much do you have, how big is the environment. Second question is, how much customization have you done? So you're going to need to understand what customizations are in your environment. If everything you've done is in the box, in the browser, it's going to be a relatively easy path. If you have very complex customizations, custom code, undocumented code, you need to understand where those bodies are buried. There are an awful lot of organizations that you can go in and see in July 2010. There's a compiled solution out there called BobTest2, WSP. The reason why that's out there, or it could have a different name, is that was a lot of people's, that was about 2 months after the release of 2010. A lot of people put web parts into production as a test. And if they don't have a tight governance process, those things are on the production environment. Is BobTest2 WSP mission critical? Maybe, maybe not, but we need to know where those things are so we know what needs to be tested, what needs to be removed, where's the JavaScript. If you have third-party utilities, you need to come back to the ISVs and make sure they're certified to have their solutions work on 2013. How are you going to go get those things? We'll walk through some of this in a moment. This is all information you're going to need from the current farm. If you're going from 2010 or 2007, where are the content databases? How are the services described? And what are the web applications out there? If you have good IT governance, you probably already have this information. How many of you keep all of this information written down or stored somewhere away from SharePoint in the event of a disaster? Anyone? Okay, that's a good practice. If you haven't started, there's no time like the present. This is a chance to start moving forward and figuring out how are we going to keep this stuff away from SharePoint, but keep it in a repository where you can go to it in future years. Now, some of the things that you see in a current farm are specific to that farm. But a lot of those things you're going to need to reference when you build out the new environment. There are lots of ways to go get them. In a moment, we're going to walk through using PowerShell for some of that. So you can use PowerShell to pull up a wealth of information and push it out to text files, to CSV, to graphic elements, to figure out what you have in your environment. And we'll walk through these cases. Test SP content database, we'll talk about in the second half of today's session, is a PowerShell command. It's available in 2010 and in 2013 to look at a content database, compare it to a known installation of SharePoint, and make sure that that target that you would want to move it to is ready to receive that database. There are third-party tools that are out there as well. One thing that is no longer out there, though, is STS ADM's pre-upgrade check. If you were moving from 2007 to 2010, this is one of the steps along the way, and it was It's a really good way for a 2007 environment to also give you a manifest of everything that's out there. If you're starting with 2007, this is still available to you, but in 2010, that doesn't exist and is not going to be supported moving forward. So you know what you have to do with database attach. Everything on the left can be brought over into SharePoint 2013 via database attach. Where are my project server people? Any of you? Anyone? Couple. So project server databases come over. They get collapsed, those 4 databases, into one. Obviously, content databases are primary. Search, administration, profile, social, metadata, secure store, access databases, they can all be brought over. The stuff on the right, you can't and you really wouldn't want to bring over. The config database in 2010 is the old farm. It's never been supported and it's not going to be supported. You're building a new farm, you need a new database. The search structures have changed, so the search indexes need to be rebuilt to take advantage of the new crawling properties. And lastly, the sync database, which is used with user profiles. Because of the investments in social, that's a new topology, and that doesn't come over automatically. Another thing to plan for, authentication and URLs. The default authentication scheme in SharePoint 2010 was based on Windows authentication, classic mode. The default authentication mode in 2013 is claims-based against a Windows provider. The end user experience of that should be exactly the same. A user has an Active Directory credential, they connect to the site, they're logged in. But claims is the kind of future for SharePoint, and the present as well. One of Microsoft's recommendations is to make sure that you've converted your 2010 environment from classic to claims prior to moving things over. One of the things you're probably going to have to do. Second thing, have any of you ever, if you're a consultant or you've inherited someone's SharePoint, seen a URL that looks like HTTP, web server 05 is where you've got it? If you're doing any kinds of restructuring or rebranding the site or changing servers and you have server names in there for some reason, and again, please, 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 don't do this. Don't name your SharePoint server URL after the physical name of the server. You may want to fix those URLs. I'll give you the roadmap for how to complete a SharePoint migration of sorts and never have to look at it again in 4 days. The way that you would do it is on Friday night, take your 2010 environment, change the authentication mode from classic to claims. Saturday, reset all the URLs. Sunday, run the database attach. Monday, send the email out to all your users that here's your new SharePoint environment. Tuesday, you can go to LinkedIn and start figuring out where you're going to work next because you've overloaded your users. It's way too many changes at once. Authentication can introduce errors. URL changes are going to introduce errors, and users need to be brought along with those. Those things will those things can make people think that the upgrade didn't work when the upgrade just ran fine. So pace the rate of change in those areas. You also have a choice in how you move content over. We're going to walk through database attach, which is in many cases the preferred mode. There are a few other techniques that are out there. Some people do what's called cut and paste migrations. I think it's not the greatest technique, but you build empty environments and tell users to cut and paste their own files up and let you know when they're done. You can use third-party tools, which can be much more flexible and dynamic in terms of how they reach out and can be used to restructure and apply new properties to content during the process. You can write custom code. All of these things are usually driven by budget and time. Most of these other techniques can be much faster ways of doing it if you have the right budget. Sometimes you're forced to do it. You may have an environment where master pages have been hacked up. They still have the fingerprints of being WSS2 sites that are out there, and the upgrade is really thought of as a content rescue. Right? In that case, what you're doing is you're building an absolutely clean environment with a hierarchy of sites and moving content over. So that's one thing to figure out which way you're going to move that forward. Another thing that Microsoft talks about a lot is capacity planning. When I was a consultant, I am not going to walk you through the math on this, but this is the worksheet that we developed to help understand what's going on in the environment and understand that there's a growth rate for content and there's a growth rate for what you're searching, even if it's not in the content database. The takeaways are here. Come on. Whatever you have today is going to grow. Second, if you're searching things that aren't in SharePoint, that still adds to your database needs. The third thing, if you're using RBS, remote blob storage, to move files outside of SQL databases, you're not reducing the storage requirements at all. You know, the numbers about 96% reduction in content database size are verifiable, but if you have a terabyte of information in your content database, and you apply RBS, you may be down to a 50 gig content database, but those files had to go somewhere. There is no free lunch on that. Lastly, shredded storage, a new feature in 2013. Shredded storage reduces the growth rate of content from versions. In classic 2010 and earlier versions, every time I save a version document, the full version of the document gets saved. In 2013, shredded storage, which is on by default, will try to just save the part of the file that's changed. So if I have a 100 gigabyte content database and I edit all of the documents in there, it may only grow to 110 or 120. If you have very large SharePoint content needs, these techniques help, but again, plan for growth, make sure you have enough capacity. I won't speak long on this slide, but if you are planning an upgrade anytime soon, try to take the least impact on your environment with custom code. Because the more custom code you put in your environment, the more needs to be tested during the upgrade. So anytime you're doing solutions that are in the box, using things like SharePoint Designer or third-party components, it reduces the support challenge and the risk of your upgrade down the road. Lastly, this is a rule. This is a governance rule. Don't move a mess. If your SharePoint is poorly governed, poorly structured, hard to find things, upgrading it is not going to solve the problem. If your house is a mess, packing all your stuff in boxes and going across town is probably not the way to make sure that your house is properly organized. That's why most of us, when we move, we go through yard sales or we get a dumpster or things. It's important to make sure that if your properties, if whatever you have in SharePoint should be properly governed, and it's better to get that done before the migration than after. These are Microsoft's best practices. I'm not going to walk through all of them, but I want to point out a couple. Know what's in your environment. Make sure you do tests. In your testing, don't ignore errors. We'll walk through this in a moment, but don't ignore the errors that you see when you're testing your upgrade. And then lastly, when you test the upgrade, don't just make sure the database came up. Doing things like full crawls that really test the system are probably a good way to make sure that what you're doing is going to work. Also in planning, there are two modes of operation in SharePoint 2013. There's 2010 mode and 2013 mode. This picture is an F15 because at one point it was wave 14 and wave 15, so I'm a little crazy about my photography sometimes, but most of the pictures I took, this one I did not. You all know what the 14 hive is in SharePoint 2010? Or the SharePoint root, as Microsoft was trying to brand it. Inside of SharePoint 2013, there is a 14 hive and a 15 hive. There is a full rendering engine for SharePoint 2010 living side by side with 2013. When sites come up, they originally come up in 2010 mode, and there's a separate process to convert a site collection to 2013 mode. In that, there are some features that you have to map for. Web analytics has gone away. Office web apps need to be upgraded, and there's some guidance on how if you're running Project Server, how those Project Web Access sites need to be upgraded as well. But you need to understand there are two modes. Yes? Yes. It's really not preserved. It's a completely different architecture. It's based on search. So I can be happy to talk to you more about that afterwards, but because it's something we've had to deal with our products as well. Office Web App Server is no longer directly part of SharePoint, but sits alongside it. Plan for the Office Web Apps installation as well. Office Web Apps sits usually on servers that live in the same data center now. The prerequisites are poorly documented, but the key things you have to be prepared for is that this is a PowerShell intensive process. First, we have to install the tool, and the installation is one of these blind installations. It comes up and there's no signal that anything's been run. You use PowerShell to import the module, create a new farm over on those Office Web Apps servers. Then test it. Wherever you've installed it, if you've applied server name / hosting discovery as a URL, it should return something back to you. This gobbledygook here is what's used to create an Office Web Apps farm the simplest way possible, which is to not use encryption. If you're doing anything more complicated, Microsoft really encourages you to run that over HTTPS, which means certificates, and so there's a wave of complexity in that. But Office Web Apps no longer lives as a shared service application in the 2013 architecture. Then on SharePoint, there's a bunch of other things that you need to do to bind Office Web Apps into the SharePoint 2013 environment. When I speak at user groups, one of my favorite trick questions to ask, and I'm going to set you all up if you come see me at a user group down the road if I'm doing a book giveaway, is where in Central Admin do you go to configure the connection to Office Web Apps? It's a trick question because there is no representation of it in Central Admin. It's all done through PowerShell. Important to make sure the environment's appropriately cleaned up. Again, as you've collected information, site collections that are no longer being used, you want to get rid of. You may discover, if you're doing the right PowerShell or third-party tools, that some documents have been versioned and there are thousands of versions out there. You may want to truncate those. Get rid of code that you don't need. That Bob Test 2 web part that probably isn't being used should be removed from your environment. Any 2010 visual upgrades that were pending, you have to get those through first. And then lastly, database alignment. The default behavior in SharePoint 2010, if you ran the white wizard, that bad thing that creates horrible GUID database names and things like that, it would set your My Sites up in the same content database as your classic enterprise content pools. And many organizations would then say, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to add a content database to host the My Sites, but they keep it in the same web app, with the result being that My Sites and other site collections are distributed across a number of content databases. Regardless of the name of the database, it's just not intuitive. Move SP Site is how you get those site collections within the same area to move to the proper database so you can upgrade them sequentially. You also have to be prepared for things that are going to the graveyard. Anyone running a PowerPoint broadcast site? That's why Microsoft felt very safe taking it away. So there was a technique. There was a site template that let you use to push PowerPoint presentations live out to other people. They'd rather use Link now. That's gone away. If you have those sites in your environment, that's an absolute block on the upgrade. How about PowerPivot v1? Any of you? Anyone running the first version of PowerPivot? No. Wow. I usually get at least 2 or 3 folks. If you were, there's a little bit of clunkiness in the upgrade process since the PowerPivot v1 template is not installed by default in SharePoint 2013, which is running PowerPivot v2. So you have a couple of choices. One is you can upgrade at the source to run PowerPivot v2 in your 2010 environment, or you can say, I'm just going to pull the models out. If you only have a handful of models, you're probably better off saving those Excel files out, just building up a clean PowerPivot v2 environment, and just importing the models to the PowerPivot library down the road. We're going to walk through this shortly, but if you download the deck, you will have this. This is the core PowerShell that you would use to convert your classic mode applications in 2010 to 2013. It is not a single command, but it walks through. If you take this, and I got this from a friend of mine at Microsoft as well with a few changes, what you're basically doing is kicking the site over into claims mode and converting all of the users in classic mode to run in claims mode, Again, this is something that should be tested in advance and not done during the whole migration. And now we are ready for demo. Let's see if everything runs. Let's come back to life. I'm going to be very nice to the demo gods. They were not being nice to me last night. So I've Camtasia'd all of my things anyway, but I hate Camtasia, so I'm going to try to make sure everything runs. Here's a source environment. This is a very plain, out-of-the-box SharePoint environment with just 2 sites in it, not a whole bunch of content. What we're going to do, ultimately, is capture some information here. And to do this, I'm running in the Windows PowerShell ISE. Let's see, is this going to be happy? This is going awfully slow with Zoom It. Okay, so this first command is what you have to do for a PowerShell to register the SharePoint commandlets to it. Add PS snap-in, Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell, error action silently continue. Come on back. And I use PowerShell ISE because I can just pick single lines and highlight them and run them. So we've registered that. It's completed. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is take the command get spfarm format list. If you haven't run PowerShell before, the technique on this line is I'm actually taking, and there's lots of books, and I encourage you to go to Todd Clint and Shane Young's admin session tomorrow morning, crash it, and announce you're going to turn it into a SharePoint PowerShell session. But this command here, get spfarm, the line in between is called a pipe. And what a pipe does is it says, and I know that many of you are IT pros and are not used to structured programming and techniques like this, but to take the output of the first command and pass it off to the second one. And so this is a PowerShell command called format list that takes that output and just turns it, as you could imagine, into a vertical hierarchy. So I'll run that guy. And so here's the information that it gives us. And we'll talk about how to export those, but it's telling us here's some of the other URLs that are out there. And one of the bits of information that it gives us, for example, is the build version. 14.0.6029.1000. You'll have to trust me on it. I'm not going to take the extra time to blow that up. But that's an example of information that you're going to want to go check to see what version of SharePoint am I running. There are a lot of folks who do this, and I'm very proud of my blog on this. I always am fussy about writing down all of those internal version numbers because I can't remember them either. And every time Microsoft puts out a cumulative update, I update my list. So by coming here on my blog, this is chrismcnulty.net, I can look up, match that, and see that, for example, 6029 is Microsoft SharePoint Server 2010 Service Pack 1. So we're on at least SP1, and SP1 is a good place to be for most SharePoint migrations that you're going to be moving forward. What's some other tools and tricks we can do here with PowerShell fun? Here's a little more advanced technique. So what we're going to do in this, let me blow this up so I can describe it. So we're going to take the get sp site command, and get sp site is going to retrieve for us a list of all the site collections that are out there. And I'm throttling it, not at all, by saying I want you to give me all the sites. Take the full list of all the site collections, pass it over to the next command. Say, get me all of the sites within those site collections. And then once I have that master list, this third section here says, within that, I only care about the URL, the name, the theme, the site logo, the web template, and the web template ID. I want to know what kind of sites are in my environment. The last thing I'm passing it to is something that's not installed in base PowerShell, but comes if you download the PowerShell integrated scripting environment or have it in your OS, called OutGrid View. OutGrid View takes all that output, and instead of writing it in a hierarchy like this, we'll give it to you in a little more graphic form. So if we run that, we can capture some information, and here it is, and it tells us these are the only sites that are in my environment. Here's what templates they're on. Here's the web template IDs. Starting to approach the way that we go out and get what the features are or the site definitions that we might need to keep in mind. I mentioned features, and here it is. In this one, we're just going to get a list of all of the installed features formatted as a list, and I'm piping it over to outfile so that I can save that as features.txt because I don't want to just live with this in the screen. So I've run that command, and I can come out here. I'm going to trick it. I'm going to just tell it. Oh, I miss typing. I hate typing. Why can't computers be psychic? Drill to where I know where it saves this. I'm an SP admin. There's my features list. Just so you can see. I think everyone can see it now, but now we can't read. But it gives us, it will list every feature, and this is a fairly long list, what version it is, what the name of it is, what databases are out there, what the feature definitions are, so you have that. The same techniques can be used for other web parts, for sites. There are lots of ways, if you're willing to roll up your sleeves a bit with PowerShell, I'm giving you a flavor for the kinds of information you can go out and gather. The last thing I'm going to want to do in this environment is come over and run that claims conversion process. So this is going to report a kind of weird error. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set up the name of the environment I'm connecting to, what account should be the future admin here, and connect to that web application. That'll return pretty quickly. And clear that screen. Then I run set SP web application. This is going to say I want to create a new authentication provider and make that the default zone for this web app. I run that, I'm going to get prompted. This will trigger user migration. It may take several hours. My environment here is very small. This will take several hours. So if you do this in a typical production environment, there's a small glitch here that I'm going to ignore. Despite what I said, in the interest of demos, we're going to do that. The rest of this here will create the proper claims formatted identity for that user. And that's completed. Then that user is going to be added to the right policy to give it full control on the web application. That's the result of this. That's fairly quick. And then the last part here, grab it all, we'll trigger the migrate user process, which now will do it for all the users in the site and not just the security default contacts and not just the administrator. There aren't a lot of users in my site, but this still takes a minute or two, so I'm not going to sit here and wait for it to complete. I am just going to jump back to central admin to show you that we've converted this into claims mode. Thinking, manage web applications. SPC 10. If we come here, we can check and see authentication providers for it. And lo and behold, yes, we are now in claims mode. Ta-da. And that's as far as we're going to take it today on this. Okay, the actual upgrade. There is only one way to do the upgrade in the Microsoft box. So as we're to walk you through the process, it's preferred that you upgrade that environment to claims in advance. There was some older documentation out there that talked about running convert SP web application on the 2010 environment. That command does not exist in 2010. So you can either use something like the script I've shown you, or you could, some people prefer to bring that over in classic mode and then flip it around a couple of web apps in 2013 and then apply it into claims mode over there. We're going to build a new farm that's clean, put any, as we know, because we've triaged it, what solutions, what custom code needs to be there in advance. What the next part is looking at the shared service applications, things like managed metadata. These are not mission critical for the upgrade. You can still bring the content over, but if you have tags, if you have metadata in your environment, if you have references to user profiles, things that those supporting applications provide, they won't be interpreted appropriately. So we want the tag definitions, the term definitions, to be at the source before we bring the content along. Create a new web application, attach those content databases. Once they come up, they're in 2010 mode. The site collection upgrade process in 2013 is much more intensive than the 2010 process was. So we have the option of running an evaluation site collection upgrade and then move on to the final site collection upgrade process. You can skip some of this if you're using third-party tools as well. You can build a clean environment and just bring your content over based on the roadmap that you chose to use before. Here's what you need to think about for upgrade is you might expect you're looking for accounts that have administrative access to run the database upgrade. And the site collection process, though, can be run by site collection administrators. You don't need to give out full farm administration. If you've worked in a federated environment and different departments have control of their own sites, you can choose to let them run it if they want. In setting up your web applications, the information that we captured before about access mappings, what are the URLs, we're going to use those in framing out the web app. And as I mentioned, the supporting shared service applications, if they're not there, they won't block the upgrade, but it's really, really, really hard to get the tags and things to be back in line if you haven't done that up in the first place. There's a lot of PowerShell you might use in the course of upgrade. This is here to scare you. There's really only 2 PowerShell commands you're going to spend most of your time with in the upgrade process. Here they are. Test SP content database. Test SP content database will give you the roadmap. It's basically a dry run for the database attach. It will tell you if there's anything that will block the upgrade. You can test it with databases even if those databases aren't directly connected to the farm. It will show you if there's anything that's missing, are you using any, it will identify things that could be really bad, like schema changes. If you've changed the schema of your database, you're out of luck. Lastly, mount SP content database. Mount SP content database is the big kahuna. It actually does the upgrade, brings that copy of the database over into 2013, runs compatibility checks, and brings all of these things over to run on the 2013 environment in 2010 mode. Microsoft's best practices are all here. In the interest of time, you can download these. I'm not going to read them to you. Obviously, test, plan your capacity, optimize the environment. This is important. It says optional, but if you are doing this over a long stretch of time, please set the sources as read-only. Before you shut down the 2010 environment, you may have a period where it at least needs to be read-only. If it's read-write, your users will put content in the old environment before you turn it off. And then last thing on the list, if your SP1 is not strictly required, but you really should see it as a best practice to get your 2010 environments up to SP1 at a minimum. So let's go through the database attach process. Yes, collation. The question was, is the collation still the same? Yes, collation is still the same. So I am going to take advantage of the fact that although my demo environment's been running awfully slowly, that I went and snapshotted all of it. So we're going to trigger particular parts of it and then jump forward with snapshots rather than waiting 5 minutes for some of these processes to run. So right now, demo. Come on. the wrong one. My apologies. Here we are, SP 2013 demo. So I have an environment here, and I have already pre-built the web application, just to show it to you. So we're going to take that 2010 content database, which I've already made a separate copy of, and attach it to this guy, SP 2010, this URL. If we go in and check content databases right now, this is an empty web application I'm starting with. If you're using Central Admin, it creates a default database for you. You typically want to wipe that one away. So right now, SP 2010 should show me that it's empty. Click here. Oh. So we're going to purge this guy. And when I do this, just to be clear, I'm deregistering it from SharePoint, but I haven't actually taken it off of SQL. When we look, we'll still see that guy is out there. So I'm jumping over to SQL Management. Take a look and see, just refresh this, make sure I'm picking up the right names. And I've already brought back in, see I've got WSS Content 2010 delete, WSS Content SP 2010 out of box. So what I want to do here is attach it. So the way I'm going to attach that database that's already here is with PowerShell. So I open up the PowerShell IDE. Hopefully this is a little more friendly. So the first thing I want to do, again, since I'm on a different machine, I have to register the commandlets with add ps snap-in. Let's go do that. Completed. And then I come to this guy, mount SP content database. I'm going to skip the tests for the moment. I'm going to run this. And the syntax here, very simply, is it just says what's the name of the database I'm upgrading and what's the name of the web application I'm connecting it to. There is an option to add the verbose command switch to give you feedback on the command line about what's happening. You can also come into Central Admin to look and see what's going on. So if I come into Central Admin and go to Upgrade and Migration, check upgrade status, you'll see that we have a migration that's running in process. And this migration, it's a small database, and honestly it typically runs in about 2 minutes. During my timings this morning it was running a little more like 10. So I'm going to not sit here and wait for it to finish, but I'm going to skip it forward in the process. Thanks to the magic of technology and images, we can Julia Child this one and pull the chicken out of the oven. Thank you, Hyper-V. So I'm going to apply this snapshot here after the database attach and before site collection upgrade. 57, 63. And that's going to run in the process, and I'm going to continue on with what's going to happen at the end of database attach. So the database will come over clean. It will be in 2010 mode. There'll be a few things we're going to have to do along the way. If I've taken the database from a completely different domain, you may need to go in and change the site collection administrators, since my new environment wouldn't understand those old domain credentials. Once we're in 2010 mode, there's a new feature that you may have seen there called health checks. Health checks are a set of rules that will go out and look for known issues which could block an upgrade to 2013, as well as some other best practices for maintaining the environment. The big things that it will flag for you is if things in the database have been changed, if there are web templates that don't exist. For example, there is no PowerPoint broadcast template. So if you try to upgrade a site collection that includes a site with that in it, it will fail. Same thing for PowerPivot v1. It'll also flag informational issues. You will all have this issue come up here, content type renaming problem. It will flag something saying You have a content type named video in your source and a content type named video at your target, and they're incompatible. That's because Microsoft made a small change about the inheritance of the video content type. You'll be prompted to rename one of those if you want to, but you don't have to. The site collection upgrade can still continue without this. This is running at a site collection level. We're going to run it through the UI, which is where a site collection admin could do it. From an administrative perspective, you can also run this with PowerShell using test sp site. You do this typically to make sure you're ready to run the upgrade. If I am, however, running a full version-to-version upgrade, it's going to run automatically for me as part of the upgrade process down the road. You also have the option, because of that, of doing what's called an evaluation site collection. Creating an evaluation site collection is going to create a full copy of that site collection for me to make sure that all of the changes in moving to 2013 mode will work out. There are a few, not a lot, but a few ways based on how people may have written custom code in 2010 that could be tripped up in 2013, especially things that relate to branding and CSS and some jQuery techniques that may conflict with the way 2013 does it. So it gives you a side-by-side collection. I have a graphic that will kind of illustrate that process. By default, it runs overnight. It runs in a timer service job that typically runs in a 24-hour cycle because it is resource intensive. So the evaluation process is deferred, and it will send you an email when you're done. When it's completed, by design, it will expire in about 30 days. So if you create a lot of eval site collections, it will purge it, and you forget to go back and delete them, they'll be deleted for you automatically. Here's the process. So if we've got a SharePoint site collection that's out there called foo, it's in the content database, we trigger that timer service job to create an evaluation site. And if you want to do this instantly, by the way, you can change the timing on that timer service job to fire off immediately. What will happen is you'll get a read-only snapshots taken of that environment, and it'll clone out sites, webs, and documents, all the content that you need in that environment, but it will run in read-only mode. Microsoft does not want you to use this as a production environment. The site will be added to the configuration database and to the sitemap. Now we have two sites side by side. Note to all of you, if you have a terabyte site collection and you create an evaluation site collection, that's a big resource-intensive process. You're going to consume 2 gigs of data, 2 terabytes of data. 2 gigs would be wonderful, but sorry for that misspeak. So we go through a testing process. People go look at the evaluation. We send emails to people saying, please look at the sites. No one actually does. And we assume, since no one wrote back to us, everything is okay, and we're going to run through the upgrade process. At the end of 30 days, the eval is gone. So it will automatically purge itself for you. You can force the purge to happen sooner. Let's take a look at that process now in demo. The question is, how does blob storage factor into that? I don't know. It's a good question. I want to say that I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that in the process you're cloning the pointers back to the same blob store, so you don't need to duplicate the blob store necessarily. You're just duplicating the content database. If I can get your contact detail, I can follow up with you on that definitively later on. So here's my environment. And for these purposes, I can actually do all of this work directly in, I should have refreshed the screen. Here's SP 2010. So here's my environment. Ooh, it didn't like where I went. Sorry, I hit a wrong URL there. Quick trick, this environment is coming up. This thing at the bottom is developer dashboard, which I use in this demo environment for some things. I'm going to just jump over here right now and turn off Developer Dashboard behind the scenes. Or not. Okay, we'll just live with it for the moment. So the first thing I want to do here is run one of those site collection health checks. And I come over to Site Actions, and we can see this. We're on SharePoint 2013, but we're in that 2010 look and feel. So I can come down here to Site Collection Health Checks. It tells me they've never been run before. If you have Developer Dashboard on in your environment, you'll see that trace at the bottom of the screen. If not, you won't. And it tells me, just as I said, the name of the following content types conflict with new content types that may be added during upgrade. And that's really all that it found. So there are no blocks to the upgrade process. We actually can trigger this thing right now. This little bar at the top, this little annoying thing, says, experience all that SharePoint 15 has to offer. Start now or remind me later. So if you say start now, you will be brought to a screen, and you're going to get warned. Get ready for all the fun things in SharePoint 2013, but are you sure you want to do this? Or do you want to try a demo of this, and we'll let you know when it's ready. That's the way that a site collection admin can trigger the demo process. But we're not, in the interest of time, we're not going to wait a day or two. New Orleans is a wonderful city, but I know we all have places to go. You're going to get warned again that this is an irrevocable process. We say we're ready. The site collection upgrade process fires off. This is usually a fairly quick process for a small database, but again, in my timings, this was running about 5 minutes, so I'm going to accelerate the process forward a little bit here and go apply this snapshot. This will only take a couple of minutes. Once this, a couple seconds. Once this comes up, so lo and behold, we'll be running our SharePoint 2010 out-of-box site in 2013 mode, and there's one last step we're going to walk through, which is running the health check again to see there's value in those health checks beyond upgrade, and I'll show you what we get over there. So I hit refresh on this screen. So this was what you were seeing during the upgrade process before, and now I'm refreshing this environment. And when it comes up, if my image applies appropriately, here we go. Ta-da, we've got the 2013 look and feel. We're fully running in the 15 rendering engine, not the 14 rendering engine. So my customizations are being delivered from the 2013 core. We can see Developer Dashboard, by the way, in 2013 mode. It's a pop-up window. It doesn't sit at the bottom of the screen. That's what this little trick is over here. Come see me at the end if you want another script about how to turn that on or off. It's a couple lines of PowerShell to just flip it to on mode or off mode. Anyway, I said the last thing I wanted to do on this process is go back into site settings. And here we're going to run the health check one last time. And in those site collection health checks, what we're going to see when this comes up is that it's going to see some places where there have been changes to pages that vary from the master page layouts that they had right now. So you get the option to reset those to default. This is actually completely normal behavior because this is an environment that was just out of the box 2010, coming to out of the box 2013. So this is a safe thing to do. Reset all pages to the site definition. We get a small warning error, and it comes up. This one in testing came up in a couple seconds. We are good to go. And if we ran that site collection health check one more time, now we will get to that magic screen. We have a clean bill of health. Everything's there. No galleries are missing. All the content types are properly defined. So everything that we needed to do is great. this process should be run at least once or twice before you go into production. I really don't encourage you. There's more testing that needs to be done at this point. Things like full crawls and things like making sure that users' experience of the content is exactly what we think it should be. Got 10 minutes to go. I'll save a little bit of time for questions. So in troubleshooting, one of the core changes in 2013 has got to do with how we log the behaviors. The log files that are generated by schema database upgrades as well as site collection upgrades now use ULS log format. How many of you use ULS log viewer? Great. You can use those for upgrade now. So, yay. Sorry, I missed what I was going to say there. And it's important to, that's one of the key steps that you're going to use when you're troubleshooting. Most of you will see warnings and things that are tolerable, but you want to trace them back to the source. ULS log viewer helps see what those things are. And it is a best practice to rerun those health checks at the end of the upgrade. A few words on special cases. The so-called N+2 upgrade, SharePoint 2007 to 2013. Here's your approach. And don't shoot me, but this is what it is. First, you take a 2007, you build a 2010 environment. Migrate to it. Step 2, guess what you're going to do? We're going to take that 2010 environment and migrate it to 2013. That is the roadmap for doing an in-the-box upgrade of SharePoint 2007 to 2013. Based on how many versions you're moving forward, there's a point in time where it's easier probably just to move the files than to march along through every version of SharePoint. It also varies on what level of custom code. There are some organizations that have found that they have solutions that work in 2013 but would work differently in 2010, and they don't want to code it for 2010 just for the purposes of the upgrade. Sometimes you want to skip right past that. Finally, this is the most complex scenario, and this is not something I can demo because it takes a long time to build these things out, but I want to lay this out for you. How many of you are making use of content type syndication in SharePoint 2010? Okay. This scenario is looking at an environment where you're going to migrate to 2013 in part, and you would still have a 2010 environment that's out there, and you will have some sites in 2013 in 2010 mode, and some sites in 2013 mode. This is a fairly complex set of needs. So what we want to do is take advantage of content type syndication, but there's a catch. Under the hood, content type syndication is leveraging the Microsoft Backup and Restore APIs. Backup and Restore does not work cross versions. So I can't syndicate. I can share managed metadata, actually, from 2013. I can share the term definitions back to 2010, but I can't share the content types. So I need to be able to take what I have today, copy it, upgrade it to 2013 so I support all the modes I need in every place. So here's what we're starting with. We'll start with a 2010 environment with managed metadata and a content type hub that's pushing out types with syndication to some subscribing site collections. In the first step of the process, we're going to make a second content type hub in SharePoint, 2010. We're going to back those up. But the key thing that I want is I want to have a duplicate content type hub on the 2010 side and then make copies of those databases. On 2013, I'm then going to use the copies of those databases to set up twin hubs over there. One is going to serve as the basis for 2010 mode content types. One is going to serve as the basis for 2013 mode content types. We're going to do database attaches, very similar process to what we did for content for the classic content databases. We're going to stay in 2010 mode. Then the other one, content type hub 1, we're going to upgrade and kick to 2013 mode. Next, we make sure, since I have all those hubs out there, we're going to set up multiple shared service applications, 3 of them in 2010. One is going to be the master term store for everything, NB, the content type of record for content types for 2013 sites. The second one will supply the same services to 2010 sites on the 2013 environment. The third hub will push those content types back to the source 2010 farm for sites that are in that mode. You have to configure the proxy connections to make sure that each of those published MMS applications knows where the content type hubs are and who's got managed metadata. The end state that this will all get you to is this. So we will have 3 MMS applications living in 2013. This one, metadata 1, is the master. At some point down the road, it probably will be the only one. It's the term store for everything, and it's the master hub for all of my SharePoint 2013 sites in 2013 mode. The second one is doing the same thing for the 2010 mode sites, MMS2. And the third one is living in 2013, but it is pushing kind of across the version thing back to my source environment so that the content type hubs will flow down into 2010. That gets us to where we want to be. You have essentially one-stop shopping for managing that process. However, this is not for the faint of heart. When you do this, you will have to be very careful about how you sync content types and field types moving forward. There is no graphic way of doing it. This requires XML and access to the object model, because you need to make sure if you change content types or add new content types and add fields to those, it's a manual process to make sure that all of those share the same content type IDs and field IDs behind the scenes. So make sure you need this before you move down this road, but it can be done. It says I have 2:37 left. This is a slide from the East End of Long Island. It reminds me to stop talking. So thank you very much for your time today. We'll be around for questions. So I love speaking at TechEd. A couple of things. I saw many of you at my book signing the other night. If you did not get a book there, you can come to our website at quest.com/get-chris-book. You can download a copy of my 2010 Consultant's Handbook free. We get an email address for you just so we can email it to you. So that's there. There'll be some time for Q&A here. Microsoft wants me to put up related content. I'm presenting on social this afternoon. There are some sessions tomorrow on SharePoint 2013 admin and on migration. A couple of hands-on labs, I think, that are real strong. Some additional resources that are out there. Encourage you to download those. And of course, Channel 9, you've seen this enough times already. Please be nice to me in evaluations. I really you can please be honest, but I love speaking about this stuff, and I really want to give you a chance to answer these things. So there's time for a few questions. If you could go to the mic so folks can hear you, that would be